right, y'all. So we are into Unit 7. Again, we're going to come back and pick up Unit 6 in just a bit, and I am going to try to make these a little bit shorter, so let's go ahead and get started. So Unit 7 is all about industrial and economic development patterns and processes. And so this is, if you want to pause this and take a look, these are the things that we'll be doing. There are 8 different sections here, and we're going to be doing the Industrial Revolution Day, and we've talked about this already, so I think we'll be able to get through this one relatively quickly. So take a look at this timeline. When we talk about the Industrial Revolution, we're talking. It depends on who you ask, but this is really the 1800s going into the very early 1900s, and so you can see. Here's a couple of different inventions that were along the way. We have the steam engine, 1769. Here's a kind of the first practical steam engine, 1712. Going up to 1908, the Model T, that's a car, starts to get produced. Here's the Wright brothers with the first heavier than air flight, heavier than air machine flight, something like that. But anyway, the first flight. So you can kind of see cotton gin, steel plow, sewing machine. So this is the time period when all these inventions just went crazy, and it was tons of labor saving, tons of productivity, all of this stuff. And so I want to take a look at a couple of statistics that are going to be relevant for this. We'll look at some of the big inventions that came as a result of this. So here's kind of the essential knowledge. Okay, so here's what we want to be able to do at the end of this: explain how the Industrial Revolution facilitated the growth and diffusion of industrialization. So, how did this spread, and how did it grow, and then how did it spread? So, definitely a result of new technologies, uh, in part because of the availability of natural resources. It spread and caused food supplies to increase, population growth, increased number of industrial jobs in the cities. So we get some urbanization there. And investors in industry sought out more raw materials. And so this is when colonialism happened. And so while there's a lot of good things that happened with industrialization, and I think, well, I won't go there. So good things and bad things, like everything in life. All right, so take a look at this, and we've mentioned this, what this is before. So this is world GDP, and GDP is gross domestic product. It's an economics term, and we'll get more into it in 7.3 or 4, I think it is. So, but anyway, it just measures the dollar output of a country, and this is of the world. And so you can see here we have the years down here, and then trillions of dollars over here. You can see when it kind of starts to kick up. Okay, so here's the 1500s. So it's kind of well, it's not kind of, it is basically flat up until here. And so, this is, I'm guessing 16, 17, 18, 19, and here we are around 20. And so you can kind of start to see it edges up here some 1800s, and then it really starts to ramp up. And so this is what the Industrial Revolution did. And when we talk about the Industrial Revolution, it was not spread across the world, wasn't equally spread. You can kind of see here the, let's see if we can move that, the different years. And so this is the relative share of world manufacturing from 1750 to 1900. And so you can see the United Kingdom, so they all kind of started. You can get an idea of where they start. And so, you can see that the United Kingdom had some big growth from where they started. Obviously, the U.S. did. Japan actually lost some. And so you can kind of get an idea of who was benefiting where and to what degree. So let's run through these real quick. These are some of the inventions that occurred during the Industrial Revolution. Remember, all of these are labor-saving inventions, and so it makes manufacturing, the production of things, a lot faster. And one of the big things that this changed, I mean, and it's a huge thing, is the way that people survived. Because before this, they would produce for themselves, and they might produce a surplus, or they might have a trade and be an artisan with certain things, and they were paid based on what they produced. And now, when we start to get into factory settings and things like that, people start to get paid for their time, and they're not, the single producer. They are part of a bigger complex of production, complexity of production, and so, and we're talking about manufacturing. Uh, Factories, thank you. So anyway, let's just run through these real quick. Telegraph, here's the cotton gin. Uh, you'll hear a lot more about this in U.S. history, but the spinning jenny. So notice these early ones. A lot of the early ones were in textiles, and textiles is manufacturing cloth. So anyway, that's a lot of the beginnings of industrialization. And let's see, the modern road system kind of started. So transportation became a bigger one. The Bessemer process. This was a new way to produce steel that was a lot cheaper. Cement, the Portland cement, and the invention of concrete. You know, think of all the stuff that we have with concrete. Here we have transportation. Sorry, the first factory opened. This one is where this is in Lomas Manufacturing. I'm not sure where that is. I know we had in the U.S. a lot of this manufacturing was up in the Northeast. So this is lighting for the streets, the power loom, the tin can. This did a lot for preserving food. Friction matches, typewriter. This is an electrical generator, a sewing machine, and again, all these are labor-saving devices. They invented robots, some around 1850 or so, and this is how they made cars back then. That's a joke, but the assembly line was part of this. The internal combustion engine, obviously not this one, but the beginnings of the internal combustion engine were also around this time. Incandescent light bulb, and so you can see all of these inventions, and it really ramped up production and total output. And for the most part, it made people's lives better. Okay, so we also had, and we talked about this in Unit 5, that the agricultural revolution was kind of going along with and part of the industrial revolution. And so, you know, all the farming tools that we had talked about, seed drill, the horse hoe, pulling the horse pulling the hoe instead of a person, reaper, thrasher, all of these things greatly, greatly increased the amount of productivity for each farmer. And so we have more food production. And so take special note of this. More food means there's less famine and healthier populations, increased life expectancy. And so we start to see the population increase a bunch. Okay, and so as part of the industrial / agricultural revolution, we have more food, healthier population, and an increase in population itself. All right, and so one of the other big things here is that a lot of these new tools took the place of farm workers. So not as many workers were needed, and so this worked out well because those new tools that were being created caused some farm workers to lose their job. But the Industrial Revolution, we had a lot of creation of stuff, including the machines that took their job. And so the creation of this stuff caused people to move into the cities to work at the factories that created all that stuff. And so even though the farmer out here, if this is their farm here, they were a farm worker there, they may have lost their job, and now they can move and oops, oh Lord, sorry about that. They can move and there we go. Move into the city and work at these factories. And so we do have this increase in urbanization. So a lot more people in the cities. All right, take a look at this. And so if I didn't tell you what years the Industrial Revolution occurred, hopefully you could look at this and kind of figure it out. So here's our world population since year one, basically. And this is life expectancy from 1543 up until about now. And so hopefully you could look at this, and if I said, hey, some big event called the Industrial Revolution happened at some point in time, hopefully you would kind of be able to look at this and say, hey, you know what? It really kind of starts to tick up in this area, and it really starts to tick up in this area. And so, these are the effects of the Industrial Revolution for sure. Now, the other part is we have this big change in class structure. Before this, most people were poor, and there wasn't really much of a middle group. Some, but by no means nothing like we have today. And so when we talk about industrialization, there were a couple of groups that benefited. Obviously, the wealthy, the people who own these factories, the super wealthy. Think about like Bill Gates today, or Elon Musk, or Jeff Bezos. Those people benefited greatly, and the people back in the time that are the equivalents today of the super wealthy today. So obviously the business owners did really well. The people in the middle income areas, and so these are the businessmen, other professions, and so the kind of like that middle level. These aren't the people that were making the stuff. These are the people that were managing the people that make the stuff, and so or the sellers or banks, stuff like that. And so that would be this group, and they did pretty well as well, right? This group expanded because as industrialization expanded, all of those jobs needed to be filled, and so the people who were in those jobs actually benefited a lot. The working class, however, they didn't necessarily benefit a ton. Okay, they weren't necessarily better off. A lot of machines replaced workers, and so all of these new machines are awesome, but they do take people's jobs, and so we call that substitute capital. Capital meaning machinery here, meaning that if you create a machine and it replaces somebody's job, then it's a substitute for it. But at the same time, a lot of machines that were created required workers to work them, and so that would be complementary. So some people would lose their jobs, some would gain jobs, but generally speaking, the life of the working class was rather tough. 5 to 7 day work weeks, working at least half the day. Women and children paid less, and by the way, focus on that. We didn't have child labor laws for a while, and so there were a lot of children working when children should be in school. And the other thing is the government, and this is true for the U.S. When workers would complain about the working conditions and they might go on strike, talking about labor unions. A labor union is a group that represents this group, the working class. And so a lot of times, and you'll learn this in U.S. history, when during this time period, late 1800s especially, when the workers would go on strike or whatever, that the government would tend to favor the businesses instead. And so, in these labor unions, they fight for things like higher wages, better working conditions, safer working conditions, time off, all that kind of stuff. And so in the US, this was known as the Gilded Age. And something that's gilded would have like this golden outer shell to it, but on the inside, it was kind of ugly. And Mark Twain, I think, was the one who coined the phrase. But the idea was, look, especially the late 1800s, he would say, look, it looks good from the outside because we're producing a lot of stuff. The U.S. is becoming a wealthy country. Hey, everything looks great. But when you started to get into the inside and look at what people's lives were like, everything was, great for these folks, but these folks were the outer coating, the golden outer coating, and this was the inside of it. And so the working class, they had a tough time for sure. Now, a couple of reasons that the industrialization took off. Obviously, natural resources, new technologies, and new jobs. And so we have some of the natural resources they're able to exploit now. This would be iron ore, and that's coal. And so when we look at Britain, this is where it really took off. They were the first to industrialize in the 1700s, and they had large deposits of these things. Okay, and it was used to, for steam engines, for trains and ships, and all this kind of stuff. And so, also goods, especially textiles, were being produced much more quickly in mass quantities in factories because of a lot of these new inventions. And so, the availability and not even so much the availability, but the knowledge now to be able to use these natural resources for your benefit, for their benefit, was a big deal. Also, if we look, and we talked about this, about how the industrial revolution changed society a bit. So you can see lots and lots of factories spring up. And so this is a U.S. city. We've had our time with this, plenty of pollution back then for us. And this is an example of urbanization. So all these people, a lot of these people may have lived on farms and then come into the city to try to get jobs, or they migrated from Europe, especially, and to get jobs that were in the city. So big increase in urbanization, big increase in the number of factories. And so make sure I'm not missing anything over here. So the class structure, I talked about that. Let's see. Yeah, leave it at that. And so the demand for raw materials, this is the last part. The demand for raw materials. So they got these great inventions, learning how to use all these different raw materials and manufacture things from these raw materials. And so they realized, places like England realized that they needed to go and expand where they could get those raw materials from. And this is the growth of colonies. Okay. So England had a lot of the European countries had colonies. And so, whoops, that should be in India. So in India, they would get these resources. In Africa, they would get all of these. We know that, when they came over into the Americas, a lot of lumber was used, fishing, stuff like that. And so, the European countries would establish these colonies for those raw materials, and the raw materials would come back to them. They would convert them into finished products. And we know, especially after our agriculture unit, that the people that produce, that manufacture the finished good, they're the ones that make the money, not the farmers. And so this is the beginning of the exploitation of a lot of these we'll just say developing countries, for lack of a better word, at this point. So you can see Britain, France, Belgium, Germany established all these different trade routes and transportation networks to connect the colonies to the home country. And again, the home country is where these raw materials would go back to get built. So let's see. The last thing, all the new infrastructure that came along with industrialization. So you can see things like railroads and ports, the Suez Canal, the ship that got stuck there. That's where it was. So anyway, so lots of transportation and global transportation infrastructure. And this is where the colonization was happening. And this is not the entire world, leaves off the Americas, but you get a sense for it. So here's the European colonies. And we've looked at this map before. So the green is French. This purplish color is England. And so all of these European countries would go and gather their raw materials from these places, bring it back, produce the finished product, sell it throughout the world, and become very, very wealthy. All right. So that's it for that one. All righty. Not bad.